I've talked a lot about how the loop is the central process in WordPress. In this video, I want to show you how you can create your own loops apart from the loop in a WordPress template file. Now let's remind ourselves of the way WordPress works. It takes a URL and it generates a query. So in this case, it's going to say, find all the posts with the author ID of 1. So URLs are triggering a database query. Look for page ID 2, look for category 45, whatever it is. This is what's going on behind the scenes in any URL. Even if you've got pretty URLs turned on with permalinks so they read nicely for human beings, it's still ultimately this, question mark, some query parameter. But you can create your own queries, and you use a class called WPQuery. That's the one you want to use, and here's where you specify your parameters for it. Remember, when I had that URL, it was creating that author equals 1, was creating a query already. That was the parameter being passed. In this case, we have to start from scratch. We have no parameters being passed, and we do it right here in these brackets. You can actually do this in several different ways. There's lots of different syntaxes for that, the one we just saw here using the ampersands. Or you could create an array this way, or this is one of my favorites, creating an array this way so that you can more easily read them, especially in a really complex array. That's helpful. Where do you find these parameters? Well, we go over to WordPress functions in the codex, and in WPQuery, you'll find all the parameters you can possibly use with lots of great examples. And there are a lot of parameters, believe me. So you can do just about anything you want with this query. Lots and lots of parameters to go through there. So you'll find that in the codex quite easily. All right. So let's go back to creating our query here. One of the things that's very important is notice I've created a variable here that's going to hold my query. And then what I do is I plug it in here next to have posts. Now if I didn't do this, have posts would just assume I was looking for the query on the page, the one that was started by the URL. I've got to specify here, no, look at my query, not the main page query. And I have to do it at every step here. Every step of the way I've got to say it's my query we're looking at. Then I run through my query and I finish up just like I do with a regular loop. Now I'm assuming here that you've already done the main loop on the page, and that you're not going to need that main query, the original query, any longer. But quite often you might. So what you want to make sure you do, and this is actually useful no matter what you're doing, is you reset your query when you're finished. And you do that down here at the bottom. After your loop is finished, you do reset query. And what that does is get rid of all of your query parameters and goes back to the original one on the page. And it's just a good idea to do this anyway, because you never know when you're going to want to use a template tag further down the page and it's got to reference that original query, for example. If you don't do this, anything after this query is going to reference your parameters in your query here. So you want to get rid of that and sort of go back to whatever query was on the page originally. Don't confuse reset query, by the way, with another function called rewind posts. Rewind posts is a handy little function because you can go back in your loop. You finish your loop and you say, no, let's go back to the beginning. Rewind to the first post again and start all over. You can use that in your loops or the main loop wherever you want, but it's not the same as resetting the query, which gets rid of whatever query you're on right at the moment, goes back to any others that were on the page. You don't want to confuse WPQuery with query posts, and it's easy to do. Query posts should be left for modifying an existing loop, and in particular, the main loop of the page. Remember that main loop was coming out of a query that happens automatically from the URL. But what if you want to modify that query? Where do you do that? I mean, it's happening automatically once the URL goes into WordPress. Well, you do it using query posts. And you can put it right up under the header perhaps, or just before the loop literally starts. As long as you get it in there before the loop, that's where you can use query posts. Now, keep in mind, query posts completely changes the original query. Unless you do this, unless you bring in the original query with query string, global means I can use this variable now, and I add on to it using my dot from PHP syntax. The dot means add this on to the end, and I've got my ampersand there so that it's the next item in the list. I can put in as many parameters as I want here, but I'm adding on to the original query string. And, of course, remember, if you modify the query through query posts and you want to go back to the original, always reset your query, and then you'll go back to what you had originally on the page. So those are some ways that you can create your own loops, your own queries within WordPress in addition to the main one.